Well, thanks everyone, and welcome back after a short little break. Again, my name is Sean Dione, so I'm a program officer at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and so this is our last session. And so if you've been with us since early yesterday, mid-afternoon, as it were, we've been on this path of sort of a relentless path of achieving higher and higher levels of scale. So moving from circuits down to even cellular recordings in the last talk. But for this last session, we're going to turn our attention to a slightly different form of scale. Obviously at the Gates Foundation, we're interested in population level scales and really thinking about how we can have impacts at the population level. And as Raza started off the meeting today, talking about how most of our interventions up until now have really been focused on either morbidity or mortality, and then on physical growth measures, which can obviously be done at scale. So things like head circumference, height, weight, and these sorts of measures. But as we start to look towards neurodevelopment as being a potential outcome marker for a number of our interventions, we need to think about how can we take the methods that we have and that we've learned about over the past 2 days and scale them up. And this is no small feat when you start to think that, for example, a small community hospital in Rhode Island has the same number of MRI machines as the entire country of Malawi, for example, right? So when you start thinking of those sorts of challenges, how can we think about, scaling these techniques up? And so that's really been the charge for our last panel. And so I'm going to hand over now to our chair of this last panel, which is Dr. Ogbole, who comes to us as a neuroradiologist from Nigeria, at the University of Ibadan, where he really spans the spectrum of the lifespan. So we talk about the lifespan over the last 2 days, but his clinical interests span from pediatric epilepsy all the way through to dementia and stroke. He's done an amazing job of advancing neuroradiology and the practice of neuroradiology throughout Africa, and is currently a research scholar at the University of Oxford. So I'm going to hand over to Dr. Ogbole to take off our last session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sean. Sean, can you hear me? And you can see my slides.
Yep, you're good.
My slides are good? Okay, thank you very much. So, just like Sean said, we are looking at broad, to deep, scaling measurements between the population and individual levels. I've slightly titled my talk to say the Beetle to Bentley and back. And the reason for this is to say that, I love cars, and you see that the Beetle is a very simple car, an old car. And over time, technology has brought, innovations and changes and advancements but we see that it's possible to also take back some of this technology and put it inside even a Beetle that is as old as that. As you can see, that this Beetle is an electric car. So these are the things that we'll be talking about, and I think we have very good speakers lined up. And I'll be focusing mostly on MRI because I'm a radiologist, so that will be what I'll be looking at mostly. Generally, you find that historically MRI started with low field strength systems, and in the last 40 years, higher field systems have come into bear and are mostly, focused mostly for research purposes. The 9.4 Tesla MRIs are being used for clinical research now, and globally, 3 Tesla MRIs are replacing 1.5. Most advanced centers now use 3 Tesla MRIs, and someone has actually proposed that 7 Tesla may replace the 3 Tesla systems for clinical and mostly for research use across the world in the next few years. And we have seen marked advances in MRI technology because of data acquisition and image reconstruction and compressed sensing, fingerprinting, and AI technology has brought enormous amount of technology to bear on the MRI technology across both research and clinical studies. But low field systems are resurfacing. And this is because of improvements in technology. The hardware and the software has advanced. And we have technology now that we can add to low field systems and make them more viable, more suitable, more robust, and more clinically relevant. And even the ultra-low field systems are even becoming relevant now with the shift in the paradigm of, and people are actually looking into ways they can use this in resource-poor settings. Talk about global access. There are several conflicts in terms of research and clinical use. Most facilities use high-field systems for research, and some of the research are not translatable to the clinic. And for the low and middle-income countries, there are this issue of equity and equality. Even though most of these systems are not well distributed along low-income countries, but there's a need to make sure that these systems are equitably distributed. The rich in most of the poor countries, actually, you find that these rich individuals have access even to high-field systems within poor countries, and about 1% of the population usually get good imaging techniques to their clinical use and all that, while the rest of the population suffer. So there's this distribution of equity among low-income countries. And then also the disparities. Most of the neuroimaging systems or research that is conducted are mostly conducted, in urban areas. And this brings a lot of questions that we'll try to answer today. Now, where are these scanners in terms of population and personal access? And what are the research and clinical facilities that are available in low and middle income countries? And then who does the scan? We have personnel capacity to handle, some of these scanners that can be available for clinical and research use. And how much does it cost? Can the population afford, these systems, even if they become available? And how useful is the information, the clinical impact that these systems are able to produce? These are some of the questions we want to put, because MRI has a potential. And if the information it provides is only for clinical use, then the clinical impact or the population or the affecting of the population, if it's not, commensurate with the availability, then it's not necessary. Then we want to also find out, is it possible to bring several systems together to answer, questions rather than using one system, or do you need multiple systems to answer one question? These are the things we want to be looking about. In terms of global distribution, Africa has the least access to MRI technology. And you find that, the entire population of the US has the same amount of MRIs, 37 times more MRIs than even West Africa, in the West African region. And the population contribution of MRI or distribution of MRI is about 0.7 MRI per million people in Africa. When you compare these to the other regions of the world, you find out that it's dismally small. And there is a correlation between the MRI availability as well as positive correlation with life expectancy and higher income or internet use. These are the things that we find out that if the number of MRIs correlate very well with life expectancy. So if it's possible, this is a stretch of the imagination, that if we make this technology more available in low-income countries, it's possible that we also improve the health outcomes of these populations. So these are things we need to consider going forward. But there are challenges in most of these low-income countries. And I'm using Africa as one of the, the country to compare is it represent low and middle-income countries. If you see, this is a graph or a picture that represents the global access to MRI, to electricity globally. And you can see how dark Africa is. This shows that there's energy poverty within Africa. And there was a publication by Mena et al. That showed in the last 20 years the neuroscience output from Africa. And most of the science output came from 5 countries. And you can also see that the 5 countries where neuroscience output came from were the countries that had a reasonable above average amount of electricity. Countries like Egypt, Tunisia, and these are the countries that have access to electricity. So if we handle some of these problems must be thought about. Even these facilities are available, we must deal with infrastructural problems. So we must look for systems that can handle the electricity challenges of this area. Some of the challenges also in these areas is internet connections, lack of storage, maintenance culture, personnel. So we must also focus on how to build the capacity of individuals that work in this region. And then with this, also find ways to reduce brain drain and increase research output that can be translatable to the clinic in this region. In terms of research output, of course, the paper by Bentley et al. Has been widely discussed in this meeting, where they show that they collected data to build a brain chart over 120 cases. And this brain chart had only contributions, about 1% contribution of data from South America and Africa. So this brings to question the generalizability of this kind of data. And then we need to also marry structure and function. Just having a chart, it must be able to harmonize with the function of the brain. Having a big brain does not mean the brain is normally functioning. You could have aged people who have very atrophied brain, but their cognitive abilities are still very sound. So we must be able to think of how to bring these parameters together, and this has been previously mentioned. Consider the environment, diet, and lifestyle, and the generate out this unbalanced data. So there's a need to contribute. So we also found out that only one set of data was contributed by Africa. So there's the issue of global inclusiveness. So research Africa is identity, and also the need for objectivity and subjectivity married properly with the charts doing things like low-field MRI. Low-field MRI is, clinicians have said that, look, it's a robust system that can provide imaging data that will help, answer some of the questions or make the clinical needs of people in lower and middle income countries. But vendors, of course, of higher sales and scientists, of course, push for, higher field systems. But low field systems with technology can provide the needed clinical impacts on low and middle income countries. The other thing about, if you look at this image, we found out that in 86, the system, 1.5 systems were not as good as the imaging data or the imaging quality you get from even low field MRIs even today. This is just an image showing you a 0.3 Tesla MRI in our center. You can see the image quality compared to what the 1.5 Tesla previously. So there's a need to begin to look at these systems and how they can impact change in our environment. And I think Hyperfine is accelerating a disruptive technology with their ultra low field technology, where they are distributing these systems across Africa. And this has potential for change. There's also the question of diagnostic equivalence. A paper recently showed in multiple sclerosis that the 0.5 Tesla systems had the same clinical relevance and clinical equivalence with 1.5 systems. So we can achieve more even with less using innovations. We're getting portable systems, low field systems, low cost that are accessible, have good clinical impact and sustainable. And people like Andrew Webb, who is also going to be part of this system, has also said that he wants to develop MRI machine that will cost 1% of the current MRI scanner. These are great moves, and I think that has need for people to look at and fund. Also, we've done a study with UCL to show that, look, we can actually provide higher quality images using image quality transfer, working with University College London. And Johannes, who is working in Uganda, is trying to build portable systems as well. These are things that, if properly funded, can improve the global access of MRI across these regions. We need to unlock the door, create open source projects to make things that are diagnostically relevant, and portable systems can help us achieve this. And they will be able to target what? Low or underserved populations and provide better outcomes and democratize neuroimaging globally. Wearable wireless devices for EEG, EMG can also help provide neuroimaging data for the global population. And we'll talk about scalable neuroimaging tools. Of course, ultrasound is not discussed in this thing, but work is being going on to be able to say they can integrate, even in Oxford, to have how data can be integrated from ultrasound and MRI to be able to provide clinical and useful research information. And this is what we're going to discuss. For low and middle income countries, the challenge is that they must begin to embrace new technology. They must also be able to innovate and overcome challenges in the environment and enhance their capacity, and possibly begin to think of how to build their own systems that are sustainable, because they must eat what they grow. Another way to look at these things is that to be able to create an African biobank. Working with the UK Biobank, we can create a database in Africa, which is one of the poorest regions of the world, which is one of the underserved regions of the world, to see how we can make our data more generalizable. Thank you very much.